Planning Commission meeting. Roll call, please.
Mr. Panker?
Here.
Ms. Banks?
Here.
Mr. Wood?
Here.
Mr. Caprillion?
Here.
Mr. Rosendich?
Here.
Mr. Hendler is not here. Mr. McManus?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the March 19th, 2019 meeting? Motion by Mr. Wood. Is there a second by Mrs. Banks? Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 6-0. Citizens' comments. Would anybody from the public wish to address the Planning Commission? Anyone from the public wish to address the commission? Seeing none, we'll go to item number 5, conditional use request by the Marshfield Area Pet Shelter to allow for an animal boarding land use to take place on a property zoned IP Industrial Park located at 3500 Downwind Drive, parcel 33-06381, zoned IP Industrial Park. Presenter Evan Monson, Associate Planner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you just stated, this is a conditional use permit request to have animal shelter. MAPS is looking to currently construct a pet shelter with both the and the shelter all under one roof. Their Downwind Drive property. A little bit of backstory. Back in 2012, there was a municipal code amendment passed to allow the animal boarding land use as a conditional use in the industrial.
It is one. Can you push it down? No, right now.
Again?
There we go.
Ooh, there we go. It's not really like you need to hear me. Getting back to what we're going to, there's a municipal code amendment in 2012 passed to allow the animal boarding land use. It was allowed as a conditional use in places zoned as industrial park. Moving forward to 2015, there was a conditional use permit issued to allow the pet shelter to have their pet shelter in their current location, which is on the airport property. And now today we are here to review a request to have both the shelter and the adoption center all under one roof in a new facility at 3500 Downwind Drive. Their plans submitted as of right now show about an 8,200 square foot size facility. Karen, the executive director of MAPS, noted that the facility is planning to hold about up to 65 cats and 14 dogs. They have plans to have about 3 to 3.5 full-time employees at any given time, as well as 2 to 3 volunteers working as well at any given time. The site plan shows ample parking provided to meet the code requirements, and the building coverage of the lot comes out to roughly 9%, which meets code. So, as we go to the next slide here, you can see the table of landscaping requirements. Since it is a new development, there would be the need to meet landscaping. As of right now, the landscaping plan has not been finalized, but below are what would be required for this new development to make sure it meets code. It would have landscaping in the parking area, total 39 landscaping points. It would need street frontage landscaping along the portion abutting Downwind Drive to total 42 landscaping points. And then on the west and north sides of the property, since it borders a differently zoned area, which is commercial or community mixed use to the north, and then the campus district to the west, you'd have landscaping requirements on those sides. And depending if there is a solid fence or without a solid fence present, you'd either have 130 or 390 landscaping points required on the west side, and then 186 points or 557 points on the north side. Go to the next slide. Here's the location of the property in question. It's at the end of the cul-de-sac for Downwind Drive. To the west is the airport. To the north is a community mixed-use zone property, and around it to the south and east are Places Zone Industrial Park, which is IP on the map. And if we go to the next slide, we can see our fancy site plan. This is zoomed in quite a bit, so if you're wondering why it looks so big, it's not actually that big in real life. It's just 8,200 square feet in size, but it does have parking in the front as well as along the south side of it. And then if we go to the next slide, our recommendation is that we have the Planning Commission approve the conditional use request by the Marshfield Area Pet Shelter to allow for the animal boarding land use to take place on a property zoned IP Industrial Park located at 3500 Downwind Drive, parcel 33-06381, zoned IP Industrial Park with the following conditions: that a minor site plan adjustments can be administratively approved. The landscaping plan is to be submitted to staff and approved administratively before the issuance of any building permits, and that the start of construction of the requested conditional use shall be initiated by May 1st of 2021 and shall be operational by May 1st of 2020.
Thank you, Evan. This item does require a public hearing. At this time, I'll open the floor to members of the public who would like to address the Planning Commission regarding this request. Is there anyone in attendance that would like to address the Planning Commission regarding this request? Second call. Anyone wish to address the commission? Final call. Seeing none, we'll entertain a motion to approve. Motion by Mr. Pinker, second by Mr. Wood. Any discussion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Pinker.
In the past, this has been an item that has been somewhat controversial at council meetings. But this seems to be, the final stage in getting this done. I do want to make reference to 3 items, however. Evan noted within his report, under the issues and opportunities section in the comprehensive plan, which is pages 212 and 213, that this would make the city more pet friendly. If you actually consider the entire statement, we have an opportunity to have a more pet friendly community / downtown. Downtown's got nothing to do with this, but it has some direct implications for the downtown plan, which is obviously a subset of the comprehensive plan. So that I think we just have to take note of that, because there are a number of action items that have been referenced to Main Street Marshfield, and since the adoption of that downtown plan, they have not been here discussing anything with us. The second point, when we look at this as being certainly pet friendly, I think we're in a good, unique position having the no-kill shelter. And the last point, and this relates back to a statement that was made in October of 2014 during a heated discussion at the council about providing some level of funding and assistance for the Marshfield area pet shelter. And reference was made at that time that there was approval of funds, or potential approval of funds, to aid the development of the pet shelter. But at the same time, the council had made no effort to provide funding for the development of business and technology incubator, a facility that certainly would keep Marshfield ahead of the curve in economic development and the promotion of entrepreneurship, which is something referenced in the comprehensive plan. It doesn't affect the final vote on this, but I do believe there are points of reference that we have to keep in mind as we go on looking at some other issues.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Steve?
I just have one question, and I'm sorry I didn't ask it of you in the office during the day. I just noticed this. But the date in stipulation number 3 about starting construction in May of 2021, being operational by May of 2023, is this a fairly updated estimate by them? Because I know they were here in this room a couple months ago suggesting they might start construction by as early as late spring, early summer of this year, and be done with the building maybe by the end of the year, maybe the landscaping and stuff by early 2020. How updated is this?
This was to make sure that if anything does arise in the next 6 to 8 months that would throw them off schedule, that they would still be within their given time frame to start. Usually you are required to start within, I believe, a year and then be operational within 2 years for a conditional use permit. This would give them time if anything does come up that would delay them anymore, that they would have the time to complete and start their project.
But as it's worded, if they were ready to begin operation in 2020 by some act of successful fast completion, would they have to come back before this body?
If they were delayed beyond what we were given, they would have to come back and amend the conditional use permit.
I don't mean delayed, but you're indicating...
If they start before, they'd be fine. But
Okay. So if they actually start construction earlier and get done earlier and start operating earlier, they're still okay under this?
Yeah.
Thank you.
If they were delayed for whatever reason, they'd have this time frame to follow.
Thanks, Steph.
Yeah.
Seeing no further discussion, please vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 6, a rezoning request by Theodore Praxel to rezone the property located at 1500 North Wood Avenue, parcel 33-05712, from SR2 Single Family Residence to SR3 Single Family Residential, presented by Bryce Hembrook, City Planner.
Thank you, Mayor. So the applicant is planning to build a single-family residence, a house on the property. And so they came in and spoke with city staff about the plans. City staff informed them that the building foundation was meeting the required setbacks for the SR2 zoning district. However, the roof overhang that they showed was extending into the setback by a few feet. Now, by our zoning code, allows for overhangs to be permitted to extend 2.5 feet into a required yard. So staff informed the applicant that the two easiest ways to fix this issue is to either one, revise the plans, or to rezone to SR3. The reason why we suggested that SR3 would be an option is because SR3 is very similar to an SR2 district. The main difference is the setbacks are allowed closer to the neighboring property, and then the lot size is allowed to be a little bit smaller. But other than that, there's really there's no difference. As I mentioned, the proposed use is a single-family house, and in the future land use map, this property is identified as being a low-density single-family residential. And so the properties to the west, north, and east are zoned SR2, and the properties to the south are zoned SR3. If the request is approved, the proposed site plan would meet the setback requirements without requiring any additional changes or reconfigurations of the site plan. And as you can see here, here's a map of the future land use plan, and this shows that it is in a low-density residential area, just like all the surrounding houses. And because SR2 and SR3 zoning districts are intended to be for very low-density single-family development, and the property to the south is zoned SR3, staff would recommend to approve this rezoning request for the property located at 1500 North Wood Avenue. Thank you.
Thank you, Bryce. This item does require a public hearing. At this time, I'll open up the floor to members of the public who wish to address the Planning Commission regarding this request. Is there anyone in attendance that would like to address the Commission? Second call, anyone in attendance that would like to address the Commission? Final call? Seeing none, we'll entertain a motion to approve this request. Is there a motion? Motion by Mr. Wood, second by Mr. Rosendich. Any discussion? Mr. Penker.
Bryce, just simply for curiosity standpoint, how large is that?
It looks like the applicant will be able to answer that. Unfortunately, I didn't have it written down right now, with me at least.
It's approximately 3,000 square feet on the first floor.
Okay.
And then just real quick while I have the site plan up, kind of hard to tell on here, but there is, the dotted line is where the roof overhang is. So that's pretty much the main reason why they're going for this. The foundation was meeting the setbacks originally. It was just the roof overhang. So and because it is such a odd shaped lot, they didn't really want to rotate the site plan because they like the layout. So that's why they're requesting the reason.
Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion then, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 7, rezoning request by Nelda and Paul Wolf to rezone the property located at 606 East 3rd Street, parcel 33-01316A from CMU, Community Mixed Use, to UMU, Urban Mixed Use. Presenter Bryce Hembrook, City Planner.
Thank you, Mayor. So in the public hearing notice, it also included 604 East 3rd Street as part of the rezoning request. However, 604 East 3rd Street will continue to be zoned CMU and is no longer included in this rezoning request. So originally what happened was the applicants, a surveyor sent in a preliminary certified survey map, and it was distributed among city staff. We looked at the preliminary plan and were unable to approve it because, unfortunately, one one of the lots would not be conforming to the community mixed-use zoning district lot size requirements. So we weren't able to approve the CSM until that one was rezoned to. The current lot layout is odd shaped, and the building on 604 East 3rd Street is just about on the property line. So what the applicant wants to do is to create a more straight property line, and also be able to allow for an access easement in between the two properties. That way, if they go to sell the property eventually, it's easier to sell and easier to allow for the maintenance of the building at 604 East 3rd. So that's the main reason why they wanted to split up the property or change the lot line. And as I mentioned, 604 was meeting the requirements for the CMU district. 606 was not. And so that's why we recommended to rezone that one to UMU. According to the future land use plan and the comprehensive plan, this property is identified as general commercial. So it's intended for offices, retail, lodging uses. Currently, Midwest occupies the building, and the company sells medical supplies, especially Medicare equipment, from what I found on the website. The existing land use is not proposed to change at this time. Neighboring properties to the north, south, and west are zoned CMU, community mixed use, and properties to the east are zoned UMU, urban mixed use. The current and proposed lot width and lot size requirements will be met if the property is rezoned. And then based on the neighborhood context and the surrounding land uses, it is reasonable to consider a rezoning of the property to urban mixed use. So with that, staff would recommend to approve the rezoning request to rezone the property located at 606 East 3rd from CMU to UMU.
Thank you, Bryce. This item does require a public hearing. At this time, I'll open the floor to members of the public who would like to address the Planning Commission regarding this rezoning request. Is there anyone in attendance that would like to address the City Planning Commission? Second call, anyone wish to address the commission? Final call? Seeing none, we'll entertain a motion from the Planning Commission to approve. Motion by Mr. Caprillion. Is there a second? Mrs. Banks? Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 8, rezoning request by Leland Abrick to rezone the property located at 112 East Harrison Street, parcel 33-02032 from SR4, single family residential, to UMU, urban mixed use. Presenter Bryce Hembrook.
Thank you, Mayor. And so also I distributed a letter from Patricia Reuter. She was opposing the rezoning request, so I'll go over that letter that she sent after going through this, but I just want to mention that there was someone that wanted to speak that was not able to attend. So the applicant wishes to remove the single-family residence that is currently located on the property and potentially create an additional area for parking. He also owns the property to the west, which is where Taco John's is currently located. And according to the comprehensive future land use plan, this property is identified as transitional mixed use. The transitional mixed use areas are often residential areas located along popular corridors, in this case Central Avenue, which have the potential to transition from a residential use to a commercial or a residential area to a non-residential area, essentially. It is mentioned that this planning district is provided for areas in which careful consideration shall be given to the proposed form and use of redevelopment projects and potential impact on surrounding residential properties. It is important to mention that offsite parking is permitted as a conditional use in the UMU zoning district. So under the current code provisions, the proposed use would need to go to the Plan Commission and Common Council for final approval, if that is the route that the applicant decides to go with that property. A small portion of the west side of the subject property is currently used for parking. And so there are properties zoned CMU to the west and properties zoned SR4 to the north, east, and south. The nearest property that is zoned UMU is over 300 feet away and across Central Avenue. Typically, staff would recommend to rezone properties that are an extension of the existing or neighboring zoning districts. And originally, we thought it could maybe be rezoned to community mixed use, which is what the property at Taco John's is zoned. However, the lot size and width of the property would not conform to the CMU requirements. Therefore, we thought that UMU zoning district would be best suited for a rezoning request because it's very similar to the CMU zoning district in terms of the land uses that are allowed on those sites. The main difference between the UMU and CMU is basically the lot size and lot width and where they're located within the city. City staff also looked into the question of whether this rezoning would result in a spot zoning, since there are no adjacent properties zone UMU. However, city staff believed or determined that since the proposed district is similar to the CMU zoning district, which is located across the alley, and is supported by the future land use plan and the comprehensive plan, the rezoning would not be considered a spot zone. Abutting properties would also have the ability to request to rezone their properties if they applied as well. So that's kind of how we determined that that would not be a spot zoning. Based on the neighborhood context and the surrounding land uses, it is reasonable to consider a rezoning of this property to urban mixed use. The comprehensive plan, as I mentioned before, does mention that development should be carefully considered in terms of the form and the use. As I mentioned, the proposed use, the potentially proposed use of parking lot would certainly change the form of the surrounding area, since it is currently a single-family home, and it is surrounded by single-family homes to the north, east, and south. However, the house that is currently on the property was built in 1890 and is in need of extensive repair. So removing the house may actually benefit the surrounding area because it's not quite in the best of shape currently. Adding a parking lot may add some additional traffic. However, the traffic impact would likely be minimal. As I mentioned before, the applicant would need to go through the conditional use permit process in order to have an off-site parking lot. So if it does come to that, conditions can be, it can be granted with conditions such as additional landscaping, maybe a fence, certain things to mitigate any issues that people may have. And yeah, let's see. New development may also require to add landscaping if the property is rezoned. Now, this would depend on the certain type of land use, what kind of landscaping would be required. But I just want to mention that because it's going from a residential area to a mixed-use area, so there would likely be some landscaping that would be required. And so with this, staff would recommend the Plan Commission approve the rezoning request to rezone the property located at 112 East Harrison Street from SR4, single-family residential, to UMU urban mixed use, and direct staff to prepare an ordinance for common council consideration.
Thank you, Bryce. This item does require a public hearing. At this time, I'll open the floor to members of the public who would like to address the Planning Commission regarding this request. Is there anyone from the public that would chooses to address the Planning Commission? Second call, anyone from the public? Sir, please. And when you go, please state your name and address.
My name is Tom Urbanek. I live at 900 North Maple, so this property is adjacent to me. I'm wondering if it turns out and it turns into a parking lot, what can I expect to see out my window? Now, you talked about a few things of potentially some landscaping to buffer it from the residential area. But it's chronically been an eyesore in the neighborhood, to be quite honest with everybody here. And I'm not looking at having that continue. So I'm wondering what the plan is to prevent.
Yeah, and so one of the things is, as I kind of mentioned, it's potentially going to be a parking lot, but it's not. It doesn't have to be a parking lot if it's if the rezoning is approved. It really could open up the opportunity to even have different types of land uses. It could be commercial and residential. If it is a parking lot, there would be a buffer yard required in between your house, so there is some landscaping and there could be a fence required. But in terms of, there's no real way to Once you would rezone it to urban mixed use, there's quite a lot of uses that are permitted by right, where we wouldn't really have much say other than the requirements that are already in the zoning code to really, I guess, spruce up the property. But I guess with the off-site parking, if there is any concerns, such as, you know, wanting a fence because of light that might be, you know, shining into a window or something, that's something that we can try to mitigate during that conditional use permit process.
Okay. And how about items that are stored there long term?
Well, typically, a parking lot would not be allowed to have, you know, long-term storage of vehicles for one, and any exterior storage there, you're not permitted to, at least.
Okay. Okay. I'm just curious because it's
Right.
been problematic, and seemingly not much attention from the city. Nobody's really enforced much of anything with it, so I think this is a step forward, but I'm concerned cautiously because I live next door, and
Mm-hmm.
and there's been a lot of improvements in the neighborhood. You know, people have a lot of pride and turned a lot of properties around there, so I think it's, you know, it's worth asking the question, what would this look like, and would the property owners be notified like we are now?
For the conditional use, they would. So if it were to be turned into a off-site parking lot, it would get to you. And if there's any, let's say they choose not to do a parking lot and it needs to be a conditional use, then you would also receive if you're within 200 feet, which you are in this case.
Yeah.
Now, if it's a permitted use, like let's say he decides to tear down the single-family house and put up another single-family house, he can do that, and there wouldn't be any notification of that.
Okay.
And there's certain other uses, such as for one, like indoor commercial entertainment is allowed. That would be like a restaurant. That would be permitted by right. So something like that, it would not, you would not receive notification of that. So it kind of opened the door for that, but this area was identified as a possible location for mixed use and, you know, not just for commercial, but townhouses, maybe small apartment complexes, kind of a mixed land use environment is what that area was identified as. And so by rezoning this could potentially lead to different types of uses. Some you would get notified, some you wouldn't. So it would honestly depend on the final land use that they choose to develop on it.
So does this make it easier for other members in the neighborhood to rezone their property or not?
It could potentially, yes. Especially like for you, you'll be next to a UMU, which, as I mentioned in the staff report, right now, any property that is basically on the same, you know, side of the road south of the subject property, we probably would have allowed them to rezone because the CMU district is right there and it is identified as a transitional mixed use area. But this would probably make the decision easier to approve or to, you know, think that it should be accepted. So it'd make it a little bit easier, but right now I think that you could probably rezone fairly easily with the location that that subject property is on and the neighboring properties to the south. And so real quick, I will step back to the slide.
Excuse me.
And so with this slide right here, it shows that the areas to the south would be transitional mixed use, and to the west, it's also transitional mixed use. So these are all areas that are kind of identified as a potential mixed use area. Now to the east, those are identified, I believe that shade is medium density residential.
Mm-hmm.
So those areas would not likely rezone.
Okay.
So areas to the north or the south may, they have the potential to, but to the east, it's probably unlikely. So, I know that's kind of a lot, but I hope that.
Yeah, well, it's a big issue, you know, so it's at least it's getting a hearing and
Right.
people can voice their concerns about it. I hope that it's an improvement for the area, basically.
If you can hang there for just 1 second, I
Sure.
want to read, a citizen sent a letter. And since you live right there, I want to get your input. It was written by Patricia Reuter, 815 North Maple. She said, per our phone call earlier this week, this was to Bryce. She stated that she's against the rezoning. She lives directly in front of the T intersection. I've had 2 close calls of cars in her yard. She's concerned more bottleneck traffic in and around Maple and Harrison Streets. As you know, Maple Avenue is very narrow and with deep ditches, and there's a cause for unsafe conditions when cars are parked in the street very close to where the property is located. Traffic and abundance of cars will increase if rezoned to urban mixed use. When I bought this home in 2003, the traffic on North Maple and East Harrison was not nearly as busy as it is today. Thank you for your consideration and time. Would you, is that pretty accurate? It looks to me like she would probably back out to
She
right
does. Yeah, she backs right out on North.
and that makes it.
Yeah. So there's been, a lot more traffic for sure. The other thing that tends to happen is there's a lot of customers that go to Taco John's and park along the street and eat. So that also causes congestion. Now, I don't know if the parking lot would help that situation, but at one time when I first moved there, that was a one-way street, so that helped that. It had better traffic flow patterns to it. So maybe somewhere that's a consideration.
Is there a stop sign at the corner of Harrison and Maple? On our GIS, it didn't show that there was?
There's not.
There's not, okay.
No.
So that was one of the things that she mentioned too, is that we could maybe bring up at like Board of Public Works meeting or something, because that seems to be her concern was without a stop sign there, that doesn't quite help the issue either, especially when she needs to back out into that intersection essentially, so.
It just looks like where she lives, she's at like the perfect storm.
Right.
She's
Yeah.
coming right at it in both
Right.
ways. I mean, you're
Yeah.
gonna have.
Correct.
So I can see her concern, but thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Anyone else from the public wish to address the, please, sir?
Thank you. My name is Lee Albrecht. I'm the owner of the property. And we purchased this property, I don't know, I'm going to say 35 years ago, with the intention at that particular time of trying to get it rezoned to a parking lot. Well, at that particular time, the UMU was not in the ballpark. It got turned down. One comment was interesting that someone said about the parking on the street. The customers do park there. And I do believe if we were allowed to put a parking lot behind the store, they would probably park behind the store instead of on the street. Because the street's narrow. We also have there's also a delivery truck that comes in there twice a week. They have a tough time getting in and out and so forth. To me, the property is, like you said, pretty poor. It's not very nice. And I'll be the first one to admit it, that's not very nice. We bought it to tear it down and put a parking lot there. We let the people live there until they died without doing anything. They could live there until they died. They finally, both of them passed away. I think the husband finally passed away probably 10 years ago. We did some improvements to the property. We painted it, so forth, but it's an old house. It has no insulation in it hardly. The paint in 3 or 4 years peels back right off again, so you got to paint it again. It would need at least $30,000 to $40,000 at a minimum of improvements in it. And at that particular rate, there's no payback on that. So we would just assume if it doesn't get rezoned, it's probably going to be tore down anyway. Because it's currently rented to some people, and when they determine to leave, it's going to be tore down anyway. Because I'm not going to spend more money, put more money in it to redo it and rent it out for $500-600 a month. That's about what you can get out of it.
Sure.
And I don't like being called a poor landlord because I'm not. I don't even talk to the people, to tell you the truth. Maybe I should, but I don't. They live there, and I let them live there. But I would appreciate your consideration to rezoning it. And if it can't be rezoned, at least maybe make it into a CUP so we could actually have some value to the property. It has no value right now other than what it is. It's too small to build anything on. If you put another house there, it'd be pretty challenging to make it fit in there. So it's pretty small. It's 60 foot wide if it's that, so it's not very big. So whatever you can do, I would appreciate. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other comments from the public? Seeing none then, we'll entertain a motion from the Planning Commission, motion to approve. Motion by Mrs. Banks, second by Mr. Caprillion. Any discussion? Mr. Pinker.
Taking a look at the comprehensive plan, this would appear to be either within or adjacent to a revitalization opportunity area. So a rezoning to bring it closer to what the nearest properties would be within that zone, if this is not within it, certainly would seem to be proper.
Thank you. Anything further?
I'll just say anything we can do to reduce the number of blighted properties would be a positive in my book here. Yeah.
All right, seeing no further discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Yeah, this will go to the Common Council on what's called the consent agenda. So it won't be up for discussion unless somebody would pull it off, which will be next Tuesday.
Actually not, because it's a rezoning request. It means that it'll be an ordinance, and that ordinance will have to be read twice. The first reading will be on the 23rd of April. Second reading will be on May 14th. If it's read a second time and there's no objections, it'll likely be approved at that.
I'll send you information. We usually highly recommend your attendance. Okay. Yeah, I'll give you, I'll email you. That works.
All right, item 9. Comprehensive Plan Amendment request to modify and amend the City of Marshfield 2017-2037 Comprehensive Plan. The amendment request includes minor additions proposed for the Housing Chapter 4, Land Use Chapter 9, and Implementation Chapter 10 chapters of the Comprehensive Plan. The amendment will modify several chapters within the Comprehensive Plan, which is a guide for the future growth, revitalization, and development in the City of Marshfield for the next 20 years. Presenter Bryce Hembrook, City Planner.
Thank you, Mayor. So in July of 2017, the city adopted the 2017 through 2037 Comprehensive Plan update. So this is a plan that we as local staff, local officials, and business owners, property owners, we kind of use as a guide for decision making in the City of Marshfield. And so staff noticed that there were some minor additions that we should add to the comprehensive plan. Some that we originally thought were going to be in, but for some reason were not included in the writing. Also, after reviewing the 2019 housing study update, staff is recommending adding some additional language that would be consistent with the findings that they had from the newest study. So there were multiple chapters that we have proposed amendments in. Most of the changes are, there's some grammatical errors, some spelling errors, stuff like that, but there are 3 chapters where there's recommended additions, and these include the housing, land use, and implementation chapters. So I'll just quickly go over the 3 main ones. So chapter 4, housing. City staff is proposing to add a recommendation to the programs, policies, and recommendations section of goal 4-3 of the comprehensive plan. So this recommendation is to, quote, encourage new types of planned developments such as pocket neighborhoods or cottage courts, which encourage shared open space and higher density single family development. These types of development can be effective as infill projects or as new developments. So pocket neighborhoods and cottage courts were both mentioned in the downtown master plan and the latest housing study. And these developments provide a new type of development that encourages shared open space to encourage a sense of community and also to encourage home ownership for affordable pricing. We've had some interest from some people that they would be looking into some sort of development such as this. In the Chapter 9 land use section, we have two suggested additions. The first proposed addition is simply to add multifamily residential as a possible land use in the new neighborhood mixed use district as identified in the future land use plan. The future land use plan, which during the rezoning requests, I often refer to those. That's one of the more important tools that the city, more importantly, the planning department uses in order to guide development and to ensure that land uses are compatible in the future. The new neighborhood mixed use district is one of the larger districts for residential in the future land use plan, and is mainly located in areas that have yet to be developed or are not developable yet, or even not in the city limits at the time. So these are kind of areas that eventually we see growth, eventually down the road within the next 20 years, hopefully within the next 20 years. So currently the comprehensive plan states that the district shall, quote, include a mixture of the following land use types: single-family residential, two-family, twin house residential, townhouse residential, mixed residential, neighborhood office, neighborhood business, institutional, and public open space. Single-family residential and designated public open space should account for at least 50% of new neighborhoods suitable for development. Other than townhouses, multifamily units weren't really mentioned as a possible use in this district. However, staff believed that it was the intention at the time to include multifamily residential as a possible use in this district. Essentially, the purpose of the new neighborhood mixed-use district is to allow for a variety of different land uses, but still have single-family residential and public open space as the main focus of these areas. The intent is to disperse higher density development throughout the community and limit the concentration of any one type of development in any one area. And then multifamily residential developments should be encouraged in these new neighborhood mixed-use districts, as long as they are not heavily concentrated, and they should also take into consideration the surrounding neighborhood. The second proposed addition in the land use section is to add townhouse developments as a possible land use in the medium density district of the future land use plan. So under the residential section, it breaks it down into three categories. There's low density single family, medium density single family and two family, and high density, including multifamily and institutional residential. So essentially we would add the word basically townhouse after medium density single family, two family, and townhouse. City staff believes that townhouse developments would be suitable in some of these areas that are designated medium density, and that the recommended density per acre should be used as a tool for determining if these townhouses are suitable for a specific site or project. The housing study update highlighted that Marshfield is in need of different types of developments, especially duplexes and townhouses. And so staff wants to kind of encourage these types of development where they would be suitable. Townhouses can oftentimes blend in with the surrounding area because they often have the appearance of, a single family entrance more than a traditional apartment, because each unit typically has its own facade. Townhouses can technically be considered to be a single family attached structure. However, there can be up to 8 attached units allowed by our current zoning code. So again, if this were to be approved, we would also look into other factors, not just if it's allowed, but in terms of if it would fit in with the surrounding area. And most of these would probably need to be a plan development, which requires going through Plan Commission and Common Council. And then in the implementation section, and actually real quick, there is a map for new neighborhood mixed use and medium density residential. So the striped yellow is the new neighborhood mixed use. That is the one where we wanted to add the multifamily residential in the wording. And then the medium density residential is where we feel that townhouses may be suitable, specifically for each individual project. And then last is the Chapter 10 implementation. Basically, the only thing that we added to this is just the wording from the housing. The reason why I wanted to kind of touch on it was just to show that the agency partners would be the Development Services Department, Plan Commission, Common Council. It's an ongoing priority, since we want to obviously encourage really any affordable but sustainable housing, and that it would impact both land use and economic. And so with that, we would recommend to approve the amended City of Marshfield 2017-2037 Comprehensive Plan and direct staff to prepare a resolution for common council consideration.
Thank you, Bryce. This item does require a public hearing. At this time, I'll open the floor to members of the public who wish to address the Planning Commission regarding this amendment. Is there anyone from the public that would like to address the commission? Second call, anyone from the public? Final call, anyone from the public wish to address the commission? Seeing none, recommend a motion to approve. Is there a motion by Mr. Pinker? Second by Mr. Rosendich. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion then, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Item 10, CIP update, presented by Steve Barg, City Administrator.
Thank you. At this time every year, the CIP Administrative Committee would usually forward on to the Board of Public Works and the Plan Commission for review the updated 5-year CIP, Capital Improvement Program proposal that's going to ultimately go to the council. And the purpose, again, for the CIP is, if you think about it this way, the budget every year is a fixed document. If it says we can spend $230,000 on a certain item, that's what we can spend. The CIP is the second most important financial document we have, but that's more of a framework. It's a blueprint. It says over the next 5 years, in this case from 2020 through 2024, where do we expect to spend the money, on roads versus park improvements versus whatever, capital larger items. And but ultimately, each year we have to reevaluate it and take another look, and we find out that, we thought this street had to be done in 2022 or 2023. We can move it out a year because there's other more pressing ones that need to be repaired or replaced before that. So it's sort of a fluid document from year to year. This year we made some changes. First of all, we got rid of the CIP Administrative Committee, which used to be made up of 4 elected officials, a member of the Plan Commission, the mayor, and a citizen at large. The thought was, those folks come on board, they kind of catch up to date with what the staff is proposing. It's really hard for them to kind of get acclimated and do their job. And truthfully, at the end of the day, they're looking for more direction from staff than anything else. So one change is we abolished that committee, and I'll talk about that in a second. Second thing we did was we decided, rather than call it simply the major capital items we've done in the past, streets, major park improvements, to just open it up to major purchases. So every year right now, until this year, for example, the technology department has had all these projects, replacing financial software, acquiring new servers and new equipment for technology purposes. They've always been fighting in the budget every year, and yet they've been sometimes fairly large dollar amount. So the thought was, rather than continue to hold it to being infrastructure type, we would open it to all larger purchases or expenditures of that type. So the field is suddenly open a lot more for competition to be in the 5-year CIP. Just a high-level framework of where we're at right now, because I don't want to give away too much. It's still at staff level being finalized. And the next steps will be council work sessions on May 2nd and May 9th. Those are Thursday nights, both of them. They'll be in this room. If you want to come and hear more description, you'll see all the Public Works Department, the Park and Recreation Department, they'll all come forward to the podium. They'll cover all the projects that's being discussed in the next 5 years so that the council can get a sense of the value and importance of each project and what's entailed in it. And then they'll ultimately make a recommendation to bring it to a vote in June at some point for final approval. So really just kind of a high level of what we're looking at right now. The plan as it sits right now will include 4 street reconstructions. That's where you entirely rebuild a street. And again, we'd like to do a lot more of that, but for those of you who know, rebuilding a street is very expensive. It's probably the most expensive thing we do. I don't think people have any idea of how expensive it is to replace an entire 3 or 4 block stretch of roadway. If you have to put in new sewer and water mains, you have to do storm sewer work. You may have sidewalk added, those kind of things. So we try in this day and age with tight finances to do as much repair as we can, including overlays. The mill and overlay is where we grind up the existing surface and lay down another 2 inches of asphalt over it. It buys us another 10, 12, 15 years. We'd like to rebuild it and get maybe a 40-year life, but those projects are so expensive that we try and limit the ones we do to the ones that really, really need it because they have such a poor base. Or something to the effect that a mill and overlay is really not a good plan anyway. So the 4 that we're looking at this year, and you probably heard these before, would be Blodgett in the area just south of the medical campus. It would be West 5th Street in the area between Chestnut and Oak. It'd be East 17th Street over by the fairgrounds, and then a portion of Cleveland. I think in the area of, I lost it, I had it here a second ago, from Central to, or from Walnut to Daigie area. Those would be the ones we'd be looking at for that 5-year time frame. We're also looking to protect as much money as we can in that mill and overlay. We try to do $2 million a year of that kind of work because if you think about it, and I always compare this to dental work, why I do that I have no idea. But reconstructing is kind of like, the major things where you have teeth pulled or major root canal or those kind of things. What you want to do is the maintenance work that gets as much life out of the street as you possibly can. And that's why we want to do as much of the mill and overlay as we can to preserve another 15 years of life for those streets. So we're trying to come as close as we can to $2 million a year to do as many sections of street as we can in the maintenance mode. The other item we have is the pool, big item, and that'll be in 2020 is the plan. If you've been following council, you know that we're looking at a project roughly $6 million. And kind of like the library, it would be where the project is expected to be about 50-50 between public and private funding. So council has now authorized a private fundraising campaign in an attempt to raise $3 million to match the city's one-time $3 million contribution. And the hope is that can be done in 2020. That's when we're planning to borrow that money. That would be to replace Hefco Pool. If you're not familiar with it, Hefco Pool is 80-some years old. It's done a great job for us, but its life expectancy is running out. This would be a nice new municipal pool with some other features to make it hopefully more friendly to families. The other item I would care to mention is related to economic development. There's been some discussion both by the council and the Economic Development Board about some topics we need to do to move development forward. They include acquiring new land for industrial development. With the new PCA project, we're down to where there's still lots available in Yellowstone Industrial Park, but no big ones. There are several smaller ones. But if a company called today and said, Steve or Josh, we need 50 acres for industrial development. We've got a great project. Do you have it? The answer is no. We actually don't have a 50-acre parcel ready for them to move into and develop. So we need to look at more industrial land in the next year or two. Housing is the other big one, where we're looking at trying to spur on new subdivisions by perhaps fronting, if you will, the cost of infrastructure and then getting paid back over the life of that development through special assessments. When people buy and build, they pay us back for the street, sewer, and water in assessments, and we recoup our investment. The other thing they're looking at doing is updating the Economic Development Action Plan that was done in 2014, and it's getting to the point where it needs to be revisited. We've accomplished some of the items, and others we've decided maybe aren't as valuable. We need to kind of start fresh, maybe, if you will, and re-update that project. So that's kind of a real short, high-level version of where we're at right now. My intent would be to bring this back to the Plan Commission on May 21st and actually show you the plan once the council has at least reviewed it and had a chance to weigh in. The elected officials deserve that first. Any preliminary questions?
No questions?
Thank you.
All right. Well done.
Thank you.
Item 11, any items for future agendas? No. I would like to say to the commission next Thursday, 25th at 5:30 at the community center. Myself, Steve, and some city staff are going to get together with we've invited the Common Council, the EDB, the Marshfield Utilities, Main Street, members of Main Street, the Convention and Visitors Bureau, as well as Mackey, to get together to, this is all kind of culminating at the exact same time, which is good, to really help us kind of crystallize our vision. There's so many things that are changing right now in the business atmosphere, the housing atmosphere, and quality of life, and we're going to be going over those three items there at that meeting. So if you would like to come, consider this your invitation. Please let Amy know by next Wednesday so we make sure that there's a spot there for you. Item 12, any staff updates?
Yeah, I have an update. So recently we were contacted by the YMCA regarding their landscape islands. They were wondering if they would be able to rearrange or basically get rid of some of their landscape islands because they noticed that even though they're not in place now, they noticed that snow removal is already an issue. They also are concerned with the traffic flow with buses. And so they wanted to see if they would be able to remove some landscape islands. Now, these landscape islands they're not required by code because the landscape islands that they're proposing to remove are the ones shown in pink here. Those are shown at the end of the parking aisle. We don't have end aisles some municipalities have landscape islands that are required at the end of each aisle. We do not have that as long as there's an island for every 12 parking spaces or 24 if it's double, if there's a double configuration. So originally they were going to be above and beyond their requirement. They're proposing to have those removed, but they would still keep the markings on the ground. That way people would know that it's not a parking space and kind of to keep the flow of the traffic. But they said because of bus concerns and snow removal, especially after this winter, they were kind of concerned about that. This blue one, they would actually be adding some landscape island space. Now they're well over their landscape requirements in terms of parking landscaping, even if they were to remove these. Since these landscape islands are not required and they are still meeting landscaping requirements, city staff believe that this was something that we could administratively approve. Also, because the condition from the CUP that they got in 2017 stated that other than 4 rows of parking identified that do not meet the requirement of a landscape island every 12 linear parking stalls, 24 for double configuration, all other landscaping shall meet the requirements of Article 8 landscape requirement. So we found that these, it's still conforming to the landscape requirements. We wanted to kind of mention this to the Plan Commission because this was reviewed in 2017, and it is kind of a higher profile development within the city of Marshfield. So we just wanted to kind of bring that attention. One of the things that I forgot to mention was one of the other reasons why we require landscape islands is to kind of, break up the sea of asphalt that you would see from, the public right of way. It's to try to, heighten the aesthetic value of parking lot, which is hard to do, I guess. And it's kind of important to note that very few of these landscape islands would even be visible from the public right of way anyway. So you wouldn't really be able to see the difference from the street view, at least. So we just wanted to bring that to your guys' attention and mention that.
Thank you. Any other staff updates? Nope. Seeing that, is there a motion to adjourn? Motion by Mr. Caprillion, second by Mr. Rosendich. We are adjourned.